So I'm a 26-year-old male, and I've been planning a camping trip with my wife and dad for an entire year now. I wanted everything to be perfect, as we don't get to go away from town much and dive deep into the woods as much as I'd like to. So this story takes place in the very tree-dense Davy Crockett National Forest in East Texas. Earlier that day, my dad decided to go a little early and pick out a good camping spot for us. To give a layout of where we camped, there were 2 dirt roads on either side of us and an overlook to the north of us. We camped in the middle, between the 2 roads. My wife and I arrived and met my dad downtown there around 11 AM. We set up camp and proceeded to enjoy the day until around dinner time, when we started to cook our meal for the evening. Right as we both got done with our dinner, we see this truck circling around our campsite. He went around several times and finally pulled up right into the camp and got out of his truck. He then proceeded to tell us that this was his family's campsite and how the firewood that was laying around was his. Now in this particular forest, campsites are first come first serve. My dad's been there since 9 AM. This guy then asked if he could camp with us. He wanted to camp right next to us. Of course, being friendly, we said sure. We didn't know what he meant when he said next to us, so he meant directly on top of us. He backed his camper in so close to our tents that it actually blocked my truck in. We weren't sure why he was doing this. There's so many other spots available, but we just shrugged it off and tried to have a good time anyway. Not too long after that, we noticed a white Dodge circling around us. We had an off feeling from this truck because it went around several times, but we dismissed it because the area that we're in is very popular due to the overlook. After a long night of drinking and goofing off, we finally decided to head to bed. I was in a dead sleep when, out of the woods, I wake up to a blood-curdling scream. I jolt my wife awake and say, "What the hell was that?" About 30 seconds later, we hear another scream off in the distance. At this point, I grabbed my gun and unzipped the tent so we could see out. My dad had left a lantern burning so we could actually see a little way into our campsite. At that moment, we see the white Dodge tearing down the campsite behind us. They continued down the road until they're out of sight. We heard them get out of their truck, slam the doors and scream. They then proceeded to get back in their truck and drive very slowly down the road that was in front of our campsite. At this point, we're terrified thinking that they're coming to rob us, but they actually kept on driving until they're far out of sight. We then heard gunshots. After the gunshots ended, they sped off. At this point we thought that they must have been up to something, but were worried to call the cops in case they come back for us at that time. We tried to go back to sleep. The next day, we had to make a beer run for my dad. When we made it out to the camping area and onto the main highway, there were police everywhere. They had stopped 2 young boys, who they assumed were being troublemakers from the night before. When we got back to our campsite, the cops were leaving after talking to my dad. They told me that the guy in the white dolly had gone into these young guys' camp while they're out hunting and robbed them. The boys walked up to their camp being robbed, and the dolly guys actually pulled out guns, proceeding to rob the young boys at gunpoint. Now we think that if we weren't there at the time, they probably would have killed them because we were their only witness. It's not work, but one of my hobbies is model railroading. Some years ago, back in the late 90s, I took to building a model railroad based around a small short log-in/lumber railroad which existed in the northeast part of Georgia. The railroad itself had gone belly up sometime in the mid-40s during World War II, with the majority of the sawmill buildings and tracks being pulled up for scrap metal. What wasn't pulled up had been left to rot. Lots of the cars and vehicles used were just made out of wood. I didn't expect to find much. About 2 hours into mapping and bridge locations, I came to this branch line which was curved off the main. The branch wasn't on any of the maps I had, some of which actually dated back to the 1900s when the line was built, so naturally I become curious. While going along, I noticed that the rails were still in place, and it was badly grown up and lots of tyres were rotten everywhere. It looked generally good though, not half bad condition considering how old it was. About a mile and a half down this branch, as I come up a group of trees, I then come face to face with this old locomotive. Now the thing looks like it had been there for years, at least 50 if not more. It was battered, severely damaged from wildfires that ran through the area from time to time. I took several photos of it and headed home. The next day, I went down to a local railway historian society to ask them if they knew about it. Here's where things get weird. Speaking with them, I was told that they had only heard about it and wondered if I'd marked on the map where it was. I showed them and they got the photos developed. Not a single one I took actually showed the locomotive in it. Those taken before it, they're all fine, but every single one of the engine and any parts of the train were just not exposed at all. The Historical Society never found the locomotive, and I, over the course of multiple years, kept looking for it. Trying as I might, I never found it again, even following the same railroad as I had before. It was almost as if it hadn't existed before. Back in 9th grade, I had unwillingly befriended somebody I really wanted to avoid. Let me start off with some background information. I don't know if it's like this for all schools, but basically, we're assigned a school based on what zone we lived in. During my middle school years, we moved and I was supposed to change schools, but I was given the chance to stay as long as I went to the proper high school later. Now I tried out for these specific scientific classes and made it in. One of the big things for this class was team building, so it was pretty much tradition that every year there was a mini camping trip to get to know our peers. I remembered very well that everybody had already known each other since they'd come from the same high school. When the trip day arrived, my classmates scrambled onto the bus and I hung back. By the time I worked up the courage to enter, there was only one more seat available. Everyone avoided it. Looking back now, I realised it was because of him. I sat down and there was a boy, short and thin, totally non-threatening. He seemed relieved that somebody had sat next to him for a while, but he didn't say anything. An hour later, he finally decided to try and talk to me. It was small talk, slightly forced on my end, simply because talking to new people makes me uncomfortable. Now after a while with this, I eventually fell asleep, and I woke up to him leaning on me. I pushed him off and nothing more was said. Sometime later we got off and went to camp. I began to notice that he'd follow me. If I did any camp activities, he was by my side at all times. It was difficult for me to make friends with this weird guy following me everywhere. I finally had connected with a few other girls though and stuck mostly by them. One event that struck me as odd though was when we went swimming in the lake. We wanted to go into the shower afterwards, but he wanted to join us. We told him not to, and as we walked, he trailed behind us. We actually began pleading for him to just go away. It took a teacher to catch up on our conversation to make him leave. Now after this trip, there were a few things that stuck out from his creepy mannerisms. He clung to our group of girls and despite our annoyance, we didn't want to be cruel and send somebody away that was clearly mentally ill. I remembered one time I was inviting them over for a sleepover and he was angry that he wasn't allowed to come, stating that I was sexist. In fact, whenever I showed any interest to any other person, he would purposely ruin anything. He was heavily jealous of my brother. Now there was one event that was really the last straw. It was morning time before classes started, so I waited in the cafeteria with some friends. He came up to me with a lot of purpose in his step and asked me to come with him somewhere. I didn't know where, but I didn't want to go and flat out refused. His response? He marched around the table for 7 minutes, no pauses, nothing. It literally took another student to tell him to leave me alone. That student then told me that he had done it to her before. I was shocked, honestly. She told me that it would only get worse if we didn't stop him in his tracks, so that's what I had to do. I told him to leave me alone, and if he didn't, I was going to report him for harassment. It wasn't over though. I don't recall any creepy behaviour happening in 10th grade, but then this year marched in. I was kicked out of the special science class and placed in CP Algebra 2 class. I walked in and who do I see? Him. He stares at me and smiles. I sat down a couple of rows away from him. Now the first week passes with no problems. He interjects in class a lot and corrects a teacher, but nothing to me. Then I heard him talking to himself, whispering. Now when he got called out by a student for doing so, they joked about it and all was well, it seemed. He said nothing else audible to me, and then he got a bit louder, intending for me to hear it. That he was going to get his revenge on the people that wronged him, and a sinister smile come across his face. Now eventually he got suspended and I moved out of the maths class straight away. I don't know what revenge he had planned for me or whatever come of him. I just hope that he never got his revenge and never hurt anyone. This experience still gives me chills to this day. I've actually had a few other camp encounters that I can share here if anybody's interested. But anyway, a few years ago, I worked at a Jewish summer camp in North Georgia. As many of you may know, Georgia is a fairly conservative state, as well as being predominantly Christian. There are small Jewish communities and a few summer camps. I'd say this camp was more culturally Jewish than it was religious. I mean, there were no religious requirements for non-religion specific focus. Rather, it was a place for kids who were often in the military to come to camp for a while. Staff would actually come from all over the world. Lots of Australians, lots of British people, and a few Israelis, and people from various areas of the USA. Each night at around 10, most of the staff were able to get out of town for a couple of hours. Enough staff remained behind to watch over the cabins though. We did a rotation. This particular night, a group of about 5 of us decided to go to a local bar to grab a few beers. It had been a hot day and was humid at night, so we decided to sit outside on the patio. For some backstory on the town, generally, we were extremely well received by the community, despite our differences. We brought in lots of revenue for the town during summer. We bought supplies at the local Walmart and often took campers onto tubing trips, or occasionally out to dinner, or for a long hike on the Appalachian Trail. It was midsummer, so we'd been out to the bars in many areas. So 5 of us sat around a table, drinking and discussing the events of the day, as fellow employees typically would do after work. About 30 minutes in, a white man in his 20s come up to our table. I distinctly remembered a jagged scar on his cheek, but I didn't think too much of it. He introduces himself, then told us that he was having a party that night at his place. "Anyone can come," he said. Black, white, gay, straight. I found it pretty odd that he had opened his speech with that disclaimer. Of course, the party should be open to everyone. Why did he have to put that disclaimer at the start? But we'd all had a few beers and were feeling pretty loose. He talked for a bit longer. Nothing seemed really off. We told him that we were working at the camp in the area and couldn't stay out, so we'd probably be heading back soon. An hour later, our group went out to the parking lot to get into the cars. As we approached, we saw the same guy come out of the shadows. He had a buddy with him this time with a shaved head. His expression was incredibly hateful. His eyes had changed. He pounded his fist into his hand. He took his shirt off and revealed a poorly inked SS tattoo. My stomach dropped. One of the bigger guys in my group, Calvin, immediately reacted by pulling out a knife from his back pocket and asked what he wanted. The original guy started shouting some anti-Semitic remarks and told us that he was going to beat us down. Kevin started walking towards the two guys, but we pulled him back. He told us his buddies were on the way. Sure enough, some more guys started walking into the parking lot. It's all kind of blurry here. I remember jumping into one of the cars, pulling Calvin with us. It felt like we were surrounded, though there was probably only 7 or 8 of them. Rocks were thrown at the car. We sped off. My heart was pounding like crazy. We never went back to that bar again.